Listen, I hate the glare on the glasses. I know y'all do too, but these allergies are kicking my ass and I simply cannot not have them on my face. So today we are doing a little book unhaul because I've recently come into a few books that I am excited to read and excited to display on my shelf. Link in the bio if you want to watch that video, but also because my one individual little engine that could target bookshelf is bursting at the seams and I frankly just need to clear it out. So the first book I'll be unhauling is Candied by Voltaire and Other Stories. Now, I've had this book for easily 15 years because I picked it up in high school when we read the story of Candide in my English class. And even back then, when I probably couldn't succinctly define irony or satire, I could tell that the story was meant to be funny. I could tell that it was critiquing some widely held sentimental beliefs of the time and critiquing certain classes. I kept telling myself when I was a teenager, oh, when I'm older and smarter, I'll get it more, so let me keep it. But it's been over 15 years, and if I really want to read Candide that badly, I can buy it again, and I think it's time for it to go. So next we have Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. I talked about why I was not a fan of this book in one of my recent videos. I'll link it below, but quite simply, I don't have space on my bookshelf for books I didn't enjoy. While I thought the concept of this book was creative, it's a very sci-fi kind of dystopian premise, it is something that I was familiar with from other pieces of media, therefore it didn't really feel like much of a twist. And in the comments of that video, some folks said that even though they could tell, from the first few pages where it was going, they still enjoyed the process of getting there. And for me, that wasn't the case. What I enjoyed about this was the way he wrote characters, specifically women, because when it comes to cis men, I am sure we have all read some horrifying passages that are like, wait, so her boobs, hold on. Like, how did this make it past editing? He does not do that. And not only does Ishiguro write about women in a particular way that feels very true to me, he writes about female friendship in a way that I was like, oh, I have never been able to name that before, to label it. And he did in this book. So don't get me wrong. I think this man is a very talented author. But after this not really being my jam and The Buried Giant definitely not being my jam, I think I'm done. I think I'm done with this gentleman. I might try one more book, maybe Clara and Her Flowers, but usually for me, 0 out of 2 means that it's done, but I keep hearing people recommending him, and I keep hearing people talking about how amazing he is, so maybe he'll get one more shot, but I definitely won't be needing this. Next, we have A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess. Now, this is an interesting one because while I would not say this is one of my favorite books because the main character, Alex, is a vicious teenage boy who does terrible things, and I don't really enjoy reading about terrible things, I do think it is excellently crafted. I do think it has really interesting conversations inherent about religion and free will and what makes a person a person. I love that this copy has an introduction from the author in which he talks about how the version of this book that was printed in America was missing the last chapter, and the version of this book that was printed everywhere else has the final chapter. I have read this book, it's in its entirety with the chapter and in its entirety without the chapter, years apart. And personally, I like it without the chapter. But in the introduction, he says, authors are rarely the best critics of their own work, so I guess you decide, which I kind of appreciate the candor of it. So I've read this book 3 times in my life. I'm very familiar with it. I'm familiar with the other works it has influenced. I've seen the Stanley Kubrick film. I feel like I'm done with this story, if that makes sense. And if there was a time in which I would revisit it, it would be several years into the future, and I probably would have to be revisiting it for a specific purpose. Like, the content of this book is heavy, like, hashtag all the trigger warnings. So this isn't something I just like randomly pick up and be like, oh, I want to reread this on a Saturday. And if I decide to read it again for a specific purpose, I'll find it online or buy a digital copy, but I think it's time for this one to go. Next, we have The Curious Incident of the Dog in Nighttime by Mark Haddon. So this is a book that for me doesn't have reread value, which if I don't think I'm going to reread a book or at least reread certain sections or chapters or essays if it's nonfiction, I'm not going to keep it. I was super interested in the murder mystery of who killed the dog in the nighttime, and also I was very in tune to whatever history, secret, something going on around the main character, Christopher's mother. But once that was solved for me, once that was figured out, And once we got to like the last third of the book in which all the mysteries were solved and really we were just inside Christopher's mind as he was trying to make it from point A from point B, Christopher being a person with high impact autism that made, you know, navigating the world quite challenging, I just wasn't as drawn in anymore. And as far as I can tell, as in from my research, Mark Haddon is not someone with autism. And that does not mean that he can't write a book about an autistic person. I just found it interesting that when it comes to portrayals of people with autism, all the most famous ones I can think of are this, or also, you know, the famous Broadway show based off of this, The Good Doctor, Rain Man, versions of autistic people that are all high impact, all struggle with communication, all struggle with eye contact, all hyper focus, hyper fixate. Like there, of course, are autistic people like that, but autism is a wide spectrum. And I find it kind of odd that at least the most famous fictional depictions of autistic people that I can think of in this moment seem to only reflect a very narrow portion of the community. So that's not like the fault of Mark Haddon. Again, I am not saying that he shouldn't write this character simply because, as far as I know, he's not autistic. It just wasn't, for me, a strong enough book that I'd want to reread. But I don't think the author, contrived a plot interestingly enough to hold up once we figure out, as an audience member, as a reader, the things that Chris can't figure out yet or hasn't figured out yet because he processes at a different speed. If that makes sense. This was interesting, but it's time for it to go. Next we have So You've Been Publicly Shamed by Jon Ronson. I actually loved this book. I absolutely love this book. I did an entire video about it. I thought it was super interesting to read it in this day and age because it clearly was written pre-cancel culture, pre-wokeness, pre any of those words, when public shaming, So You've Been Publicly Shamed, really was like the most accurate way to talk about the person who made a tweet before they got on a flight, to talk about the person who posted a certain photo on Facebook, like who still uses Facebook in our generation. But the thing is, even though I'm glad I read it, and I think it provides some interesting context in the world pre-cancel culture or call-out culture or call-in culture or whatever we're calling it now, it's already dated. You know, like it's something that I would recommend to other people, but it was not groundbreaking enough or insightful enough that I feel like I need to reread it because I missed something the first time. So I'm glad I read it. I do think it's an interesting book and I would recommend it, especially as almost like an interesting time capsule of, you know, the world there's social media obviously at this time, but there was clearly not the same level of I'm gonna say detective work. I'm gonna say the same level of scrutiny, the same ubiquitousness of a small cancel or a large cancel. We didn't really have any of that then. And I thought it was interesting the way he humanized some people in this book that I actually had heard of and perhaps had my own very specific opinions about, only to never think about them again when the individuals who experienced the public shaming, as Ronson calls it, their lives have been changed, if not forever, for years and years afterwards. So please don't take me unhauling this book, or really any of these books, as me saying don't read them, but more of I don't feel like I need to keep them anymore. So You've Been Publicly Shamed. Next we have The Defining Decade. And what's interesting about this is that this is one of my favorite books of all time. The reason I'm unhauling this is because this version is, I'm trying to see when it was published. Is it 2010 or something? Hold on. This version, 2012. This version was published in 2012. And I have read this book every single year since the year I got it. So maybe 4 or 5 years now. And every year I learn something new. The thing is, she has made an updated version to this, and I've actually read it and I like it so much more. It's way more updated in terms of the social media and the ways in which the pandemic have affected the conversation. It's much more inclusive in her examples around 20-somethings, although I still think she could have been a bit more inclusive when it came to gender language, but I don't really feel the need to hold on to this anymore because I have the 2020 version. Interestingly enough, if you did not know this though, I bought the 2012 version originally digitally through Google Play. And when I went back to read it last year, I found that there were all these sections I never heard of. So apparently on Google Play, if you buy a book and they release an updated version, you automatically get it, because I did not buy it twice. So absolutely love this book. I would recommend this to any person the ages of 17 to 32. I have learned so much from it, but I don't really need this version anymore because there's an updated version now. Next, we have Becoming by Michelle Obama. This is a very interesting book. It is definitely a well-written book. You can tell she actually wrote it as someone who's watched a fair number of her speeches and interviews. Like, it's very much in her voice. It is not really about the politics. It's not really about Obama at all, except in the stories of like how they met and how they dated, which I liked. It's very much an autobiography of her, and it's not inherently political. And I met some people who didn't like that. They wanted to hear more about what it was like being the first lady specifically. They wanted to hear, you know, about the conversation she and Barack had after the pirates hijacked the... That's not what this is at all. This is just as much about her family as it is about her and her role as a mother and her work in the nonprofit. And I found it all very interesting. And there were individual lessons that she imparted, such as don't be afraid, such as don't be afraid to swerve in terms of your career and your interests, that are going to stay with me. But this is not something I'm going to reread. Like, in the same way that if this was a documentary about her life, I'm pretty sure she's made one at this point, I would watch it once and feel done. I'm not that interested in the Obama legacy or in Michelle Obama specifically to think like, yes, part of my yearly reread. So I actually, fun fact, I got this book twice for Christmas. My partner got it for me and my stepmom. So I already gave one away and now I'll be giving another one away. Moving into the children's books, we have Cinderella Skeleton. Now you may be confused. You have heard me rave about this book. Why am I giving it away? Because of this. It's a dumb reason, but it matters to me. When it comes to children's books, I like hardcover only. I'll take hardcover, I'll take library binding. I'm fine. I mean, all of my children's books, actually. I'm fine with like used, old. I mean, I think you saw a video in which I had a kid's name on the front, Elliot. Like, I don't mind that at all. But this shit, I don't know why. It just doesn't feel the same. It doesn't sound the same. Like, I cannot stand paperback children's books. And I've been like this forever, even since I was a kid. So I already bought another hardcover version of this, and this is the silliest reason for ever giving away a book, but hey, it's my money. We also have, notice hardcover, The Peachboy, written by Eric Metaxas and illustrated by Jeffrey Smith. I talked about this one in my video about Japanese stories, but even though The Peachboy apparently is a very famous Japanese folktale, as I said in that video, sometimes you can't tell with these marketing companies. They're like, oh yes, this came from Japan. No, we made it up. It's a real tale. I did not like this retelling of it. I did not like this adaptation of it. I felt like we were missing certain information. I felt like it skipped around through time too much. I felt like the tone shifted very, very often. In addition, while I do think the illustrations, are going for a particular style that is enjoyable in its own way, it really is not my forte. Like, this really isn't my style. I don't have really educated language to talk about illustrations in children's books. I just know what resonates with me and what doesn't. Like, clearly this is very evocative. This is the Castle of the Ogres. Clearly this took a lot of skill and detail, and they're going for a particular style, but it just doesn't make me feel anything in my heart. That sounds very sad, but when I look at certain illustrations, I'm just like, yes, this is beauty, and I don't really have it with this story. So I am going to look for other adaptations, other retellings of The Peachboy, especially because when I was doing some Wikipedia research, I found that this author had made some changes that I think were interesting choices, at least compared to the version I read online, but this one can go as well. And then finally, in the children's books, we have Enemy Pie. Now, this is a Reading Rainbow book, and I loved LeVar Burton and Reading Rainbow when I was growing up. I also think it has a really great lesson about this young boy who has an enemy in the neighborhood, someone he really doesn't like, and his father challenges him to spend an entire day with him. And if he does, he'll make this enemy a piece of enemy pie that'll get rid of him forever. And it's a really nice lesson in sometimes you build up someone to be an enemy in your head for no reason, because maybe you're jealous of them, maybe because you're intimidated by them. Like, this character that he's bonding with, it's not somebody who bullies him or makes fun of him. It's just someone that he just doesn't like at first. And after spending a day together and doing things that they both love and enjoy, he realizes he doesn't want him to go away forever and that he actually is a good friend. So the story I'm a fan of. The illustrations I think are very up my alley. I love the exaggerated head style. I love the exaggerated expressions. And also you can see so much texture, like in the bowl and what he's mixing. There's definitely a scene in which there's some, like look at this grass. Like, come on, like all the layers in this grass, you can see the individual brush strokes and the way that the colors bleed together. Like, this is, who illustrated this? Hold on. I'm talking about this book and not paying respect. Calahan King, you did your thing with this one. So this is not the case like The Peachboy where the illustrations weren't really my jam. It's just that This is not a story, again, that I feel like I want to reread. And now I don't want to give the impression that all of the children's books I have are books that I read as a kid, so I'm just going off in nostalgia, but a good 50% of them are. And if a new book, like Hiroshima no Pika, is really going to kind of be the standard for all the other nostalgic books I love, unfortunately, this doesn't really make the cut. Again, I'm not mad that I bought it. I love to support Reading Rainbow. I think it is a good, cute story, but not something I really feel like I need on my shelves. So that was the first book Unhaul of the year. It definitely will not be the last because y'all books are heavy. I know because I have moved too many of them. And I feel like there are a few more things on my shelf that I am holding on to that maybe I need to let go. A few more things that I'm like, well, one day I'll come back to this. But hell, given the Candied example of what 15 years, when one day? And how long does a book have to be sitting on your shelf without having read it or without having reread it before it's time to go? Who's to say? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And of course, I will see you next time. Bye.